Well, hello everyone, welcome back and good day. And speaking of welcome back, we're going to take a little trip backwards in time over this series, and we're going to revisit the T-55 from a few episodes ago, a few video series ago. Of course, this is the T-55 AMV, and it's finished in African Union colors, specifically Uganda. And now it's time to put this back onto, or make and create, a scenic base for it, a scenic base that it deserves. A few reminder shots of where this model stood as we last looked at it, and I'll put some links up here in the corner here so you can go back and revisit that series if you're curious. My only constraint on this scene is that it needs to be set in an urban environment, which means that it needs to be set in the streets of Mogadishu. So I guess the best place to start looking is to look at some reference photographs of what Mogadishu looks like. And there's some interesting architecture in these photographs, and we'll start pulling those together, different shots, different parts of different of these buildings. Now, there's not a lot of ornate decoration on these buildings, but there are some very interesting details, and I think if I can pull some of a little bit of this part and a little bit of that part, we can have a nice backdrop for this vehicle. For the base, I'm going to use this little box that I've found, just turn it upside down, and right now, just trying to figure out a layout of this scene. Of course, the vehicle will be to the front, and they'll be on a bit of an angle, which is pretty typical for dioramas and scenic bases. And I'm getting a little sense of height and scale by just using those pieces of cardboard. Once I have things kind of figured out here, then I can start drawing out, just in loose terms and rough terms, on the base itself, a few more visual cues. I'm going to just kind of start putting things together, and I think from that, and this has been my experience in the past, is that things will start to grow organically and ideas will start compounding upon each other, and things will work out. So with that in mind, the next thing I want to do is try to get a sense of these buildings, and I'm going to draw out some sketches here, and I'm going to put them to scale. And this will be the first step in really kind of solidifying the design of these buildings and the layout itself. As I'm working on these drawings, I'm also continually looking at those reference photographs and trying to find some visual cues and features that I want to incorporate on my buildings. And a few of those are involved in these sketches. Now, I'll change some of this a little bit from time to time, but there are a few items that I know that I want to include on these buildings. Some of them have to do with these air vents, these circulation vents, open portals above the doors. All the buildings seem to have those. Flat roofs, very common. Also tin roof, corrugated tin roofs are very important. The doors seem to be a little bit oversized. Roll-up doors are very common. So I'll try to incorporate a lot of those features into this building as we get moving along. And of course, having the sketch drawn to scale is also helpful in just visualizing again the size and the scope of the project. Once I have a pretty good sense of direction with those sketches, it's time now to transfer it to the building material itself. And so using the same dimensions from the sketch, I now transfer and cut, and the material itself is foam core. And this is 0.156, or I think it's 3/8 of an inch thick foam core. And I know foam core is not the new sexy thing to be using, but it's something I've used a lot in the past. It's very versatile and very inexpensive. And always remember to put in a brand new sharp blade when using foam core. It just makes those cuts nice and sharp and crisp, and it just saves a lot of a lot of aggravation. You might have picked up from the sketch that although this will be one building, so to speak, I've kind of divided it into two buildings, so they'll be offset from one another. And that's primarily just for a little bit of visual interest. It'll allow me just to kind of step back one of the buildings, and I'll just give a little bit more, like I said, visual interest to the scene itself. For the base, I need to build a sidewalk, and again, foam core to the rescue here as well. I don't know if this was a great idea or not, but I went ahead with it anyway. I wanted to add a little bit more of a visual cue to the scene as well. And so as you see this whole base and the scene over the board start to take shape, you'll notice that there's a little bit of an angle on it. It slopes, let's see. The road itself is high point to the right, sloping down to the left, which means that the sidewalk and the buildings have to be raised on the left side, sloping down to the right. Yeah, I know, I made it a little bit more difficult than it should be, but I think it's going to add a little bit of character to the scene. Well, those flat panels are not a lot of fun to look at, so it's time to start cutting in the doorways and some of these windows and such. Using those references, the measurements are already right there, so I just need to mark them off onto my foam core and make those cuts. And this will be the main door for the building that will sit on the right side of the scene. I don't know exactly at this point what the purpose of this building is going to be, whether it's an apartment building. I think I'm going to go to something a little bit more urban on this. I think these are going to be shops. So we'll cross that bridge, so to speak, when we get there a little bit later. But at this point, it's just about making these rough cuts and starting to add, some of these defining features of these buildings. Similar to the way that I like to put my models together, I also like to build the buildings kind of all together at the same time. And for me, that means putting some sidewalls up so these can stand by themselves. And this is where foam core comes in. You know, you can see the benefit. It's super easy just to add another wall to the side. And I make sure I add some gussets on the inside for a little strength. And here's one of those tips. Make sure everything at this stage is nice and square, and it sure helps the process later on. I'll get back to cutting foam core in just a little bit, but there's some of the building details that's kind of a nagging issue for me, and I don't know that I have a solution for it yet, but I want to try something here before I get too far along, just to get it off my plate. Again, back to the references. Above all the doorways, there's a decorative block pattern, and they're open blocks, and I can only assume that those are because of allowing air to flow, ventilation. Yeah, I know there are resin products on the market. I don't have the time or the wallet to order a lot of decorative resin blocks, so I thought I might try building something that's, I don't know, at least representative of these decorative blocks. I began by using some plastic tubing that I cut to a length that's roughly about the same depth as the foam core wall, so about 3/8 of an inch. If it goes a little bit more than that, it's no big deal because that will just extend onto the back side. On the front side, however, I wanted to get that nice and even, and as you notice, there's a little piece of styrene between each of those blocks, or each of those tubes as well. And then on the top and bottom of each of these little runs, I just added another small strip of plastic styrene. And then you can see on the upper corner up there, I've put two of these little strips together, and that makes this little block pattern that I'm going to be using in the buildings. I hope that replicate this. Like I said, it's an open decorative block, sort of a facade on the front of all these buildings. These ventilation blocks are one area where my sketches deviate from what I've actually done. On the sketch, I've only have room for a single row of this block pattern to sit in there. And then once I created those blocks, I just realized visually it just didn't work. It was too small. So that's why I put the two rows together and made a taller block pattern. And then I just simply traced around the block itself and cut out the space where I needed to put this into the facade of the building. And yeah, that doesn't look too bad. Okay, let's keep going. The second building, I wanted to feature a roll-up door. At first glance, these can seem a little bit intimidating, but they're actually really simple to put together once you kind of break it down. The basis of it is a piece of styrene. That's the rectangle on the bottom. That's 20,000 styrene. And to either side, I've just added a little bit, again, styrene strip, just to give it the edges of what will be the door itself. Once the strips are in place, I just add some alignment marks on either side. This will be equal for either side, and they're 1/4 inch apart. And then I'm just going to be able to, I need to take a measurement on the inside, so I have the span on the inside between the strips, and I'll just use my calipers for that. And I'll also use my calipers to use as my cutting guide, so there's no use to using the chopper at this point. Just lock it down, add, and this is half round, a little bit of half round strip. I need to cut out about a dozen of these, and these become the, I guess, the bending or rolling part of the door itself. I don't know what you would call that. The hinges, the rolling parts. Someone help me there in the comments. Anyway, it's just a matter of a little tack of glue on either corner of this half round strip and just align them with those marks that we added a little bit earlier. And pretty soon we start having something that starts to look a little bit like a rolling door. And then a little bit of a trough on either side, again made with a little bit of 1/4 round this time. And we have a door that's starting to take shape. Next up, we just need to put together all the mechanisms that are on the header of the door. So I'm just kind of making this up literally as I'm going along here, just like what looks good. So there's a header, a little bit of a flat strip there, a little bit of a trim piece that's aligned. And then I start adding pieces of 1/4 round and half round. And these become the roll-up part of the door itself. And, you know, in the end, yeah, it's probably not exactly, you know, perfectly accurate, and you're sure if you're an overhead door manufacturer right now, you're probably cringing in place because this is nothing like they're supposed to look. But once it's on the building and is painted up and becomes part of the scene, it does look enough like it needs to look in order to make it work. And that's a lot about doing dioramas and vignettes and model building in general, is oftentimes it's not important to get bogged down in the specific detail and just take a little bit of a step back, a little bit broader strokes, and just what looks good is probably good enough. Well, speaking of looks good and good enough, let's see how it looks against the building wall here. And not so bad. not so bad. I think that's going to look the part. Maybe a little bit more trim detail to come. I'm certainly going to add the latches and locks and things like that onto it. So all of that will start to enhance it and make it look a little bit more, I don't know, believable. So let's get a look of both of these halves of this building together. So this is kind of how they're going to sit. One's going to be shorter, one's going to be taller. So yes, they're part of the same block, so to speak, but maybe the construction times are a little bit different, or there's different, I don't know. I'm just making up stories. But either way, it adds a little bit of interest. My garage door's up. And you can also see on the right-hand building, I've added those big giant swinging doors. And this lends me to start to believe that as I'm moving through this, that's going to be more of a commercial building, maybe a restaurant perhaps. We'll see as I get moving through the project a little bit further. Well, it's probably too early to do this, but I'm impatient, and I'm going to join these two sections of wall together. I use PVA glue throughout when I'm joining up with the foam core, and once again, alignment and keeping everything straight is so important. Well, I've been multitasking throughout this entire process, so while glue's been curing on, say, the buildings, I've been working on the sidewalk sections, and now you can start to see the base and a little bit of the slope of the street and how I've leveled out the sidewalk. And unfortunately, this brings me to basically the conclusion of this episode. I'm out of content. If you have liked what you've seen here and do like this channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. It does help quite a bit. I also have a Patreon page, which is open, which we look at the project as it's ongoing. I have some special features on there as well, so I encourage you to take a look at that and support me through that Patreon if you have an opportunity to do so. And the next weeks, we'll work on this building quite a bit more. I have a tutorial that I want to present about how to make corrugated metal roofing. And so until the next episodes, stay safe, guys. Take care. And I thank you very much. Happy modeling.